Welcome to the Adventures in Learning podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Diane, and today we welcome back Emma Otheguy. I am so excited to have her with us. I loved, and you all know I loved Cousins in the Time of Magic, and there is a brand new book coming out, and it is going to be so amazing, and we get the first peek at this book. So I'm so excited to welcome you in. Come join me for some magic as we explore libraries and reading and the joy of books. Wonder, curiosity, connection. Where will your adventures take you? I'm Dr. Diane, and thank you for joining me on today's episode of Adventures in Learning. Emma, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Diane. I'm happy to be here.
So I have to say, I have become probably the number one fan of your newsletter and Substack. I am just so excited every time one of your newsletters shows up in my mailbox because I feel like I'm having a deeper conversation about books and about the people who shape our experiences with books and with the world. What shifted you to starting to write these love letters? Because it's been something that's happened within the last year or so.
Yeah, I had a promotional newsletter for a long time, and I would post, when a new book came out. But it wasn't something that I was in the practice of really writing from the heart, or maybe a love letter, as you say, as much. But I have stopped using Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. And, I started thinking a lot about my time. And I love writing. I love writing letters. I love writing snail mail. I have a lot of opinions about a lot of very eclectic issues, and I love writing about my family. I love writing about New York City. I love writing about books and book culture much more broadly than my own books. And so having the newsletter has been a really nice space to get to share what I think is worth putting out there. And my favorite thing with the newsletter is when somebody writes back, because it feels like an exchange. It's a personal exchange. I think of the newsletter as a letter. I really think of it as a letter. It's a circular. It's a letter that's going out to a large group of people. And so when somebody writes back and tells me what they thought of it or shares a story, it just is really lovely. And I get to know readers in a very different way. And I've had people, I published something about dance. I wrote a book years ago called Sofia Acosta Makes a Scene that was about doing ballet growing up. And I've written a few things about ballet and dance in the newsletter. And, I have people reach out to me and tell me about the ballet performances that their mother took them to when they were a kid. And it's just a different way of connecting with people. And I enjoy it a lot.
I love that. In your latest one, you were writing about librarians and about the librarian who was your neighbor all growing up. And I loved that relationship, the idea that she was sliding you a necklace through the garden gate and the difference between her garden and the one next door. But it got me thinking about the power that librarians have on our lives, whether it's posting a map and having people write from around the world, or talking to somebody like you about the value of archives when you were going in to become a history major, or being the person who pays attention to what a kid is reading and just quietly sharing additional books by that author or suggesting read-alikes that you might like if you liked this. What is the power of librarians in your own life?
I shared that newsletter. It's, anybody can go and read it. It's in the archives, about growing up next door to my school librarian, which in obvious ways profoundly shaped who I became, because I became a children's book author. But in other ways, when you're a kid, you live next door to who you live next door to, and you think it's normal, and you don't think necessarily about the impact it's having on you or the way it's shaping who you become. Now, as an author, I work with a lot of school librarians. School librarians are the ones who invite me to author visits and bring me into schools. They're the ones who promote my books, or don't promote my books, but hopefully who do. And they are the ones who get my books to kids and who are in schools fighting. And I'm choosing the word fighting very intentionally, because we know that in schools, there's so much encroaching on books. There's so much encroaching on the time that kids have to be read aloud to read independently for pleasure, to do a whole class read, to do a book club, all of these ways of engaging with literature that for our generation was foundational, it was structural, it was part of the school day. Even if you couldn't read, you were read to at school. And I know from so much of my work in schools, from being a parent myself of kids in school, that as much as educators want to provide those experiences, they are harder and harder to come by. And so when I go to schools and I see everything school librarians are doing to say, everything that is happening in education outside of this space is happening, but we are creating a space for books. We are making sure that kids have access to books, that they have access to books on a wide variety of topics that interest them. They have access to books that are relevant. It feels like a fight, and it feels like what's keeping us all afloat. And by that I don't just mean our industry as, for myself as a children's book author, but the broader belief in the power of literacy and engagement with literature. The broader belief that that is something that has profound impact on our lives, that it has a larger, deeper, more significant humanistic impact on a child's life. I think that's what librarians are there fighting for. And I think sometimes, I go to a lot of education conferences. I talk to a lot of people. I am a parent of kids in public schools. Sometimes I'm not sure everybody else is thinking about books and thinking about our kids' access to these books and our kids' time to engage with books. And I feel like it's really important. To me, it's what made me who I am.
No, I think that makes sense. I just recently led a 3-day workshop in Ohio where I was working with the early childhood through the third grade teachers at a school. And I was so thrilled that within that group, they also included the librarian and the STEM teacher,
Mm,
because we did hands-on learning where I was connecting and demonstrating, how do you connect the read aloud or the book to these STEM and STEAM challenges. And then I modeled in their classrooms, including the library and the STEAM room, how I was doing it, sort of
wow.
demonstrating, so they could see with kids how this works.
Yeah.
But the part that was magical was at the end, after we'd had a couple days of this, we came back together and they had the space as teams to start planning. How are you going to apply this? What books can you use? How can you build this connection? And having the librarian in the mix was so powerful because she was calling up, well, we could bring XYZ book in and I can come and we can do some of this. So, if you don't have time in the classroom, I can do the read aloud and then you can do this piece. And that symbiosis, that relationship between this librarian and those teachers led to things that were so much stronger than they would have been otherwise. And I left feeling like, okay, everybody took a deep breath and we're going to actually see kids getting more read aloud time
Yeah.
and more time to play and to explore learning. And as you said, the librarian sort of provided that cushion, that air, that knowledge to be able to build that connection. I
Mm,
thought that was really powerful.
yeah. Yeah. No, I love that you were able to make those connections to read alouds. And I know read alouds are something that's really important to you
Yes.
with everything you do with your read aloud calendar. And I is important to me and actually relevant to my soon to be published book, Adventure in the City of Stories. It really is a book about storytelling and reading aloud in the library and the way that that changes kids.
And that's a great segue because I want to talk about the book. So,
Yeah.
can you tell us a little bit about what it's about? And then I'm going to ask if you don't mind reading a little bit for us as well.
Sure. So the book is Adventure in the City of Stories. It's a companion to Cousins in the Time of Magic. So it's the same trio of cousins. It's Jorge and Siggy and Camila. They get back into their magic boat and they travel back in time, but this time they go to the year 1930. And 1930 is an exciting year in New York City, which is where the book takes place. It's a difficult year. It's the beginning of the Great Depression. it's also when buildings like the Empire State Building were going up. So it's this, big crash in the stock market, and then the skyline is, just coming up, 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 up. So there's sort of these extremes of up and down in the city. And at the same time, it's also this really interesting and exciting moment in the library movement in New York City. So this is the time when Anne Carroll Moore was the director of the children's division at the New York Public Library. She is hiring librarians, children's librarians for all of these libraries around the city, including, most relevant to the book, to my book, Pura Belpré, who we all know very well in the children's literature world because she was the first Puerto Rican librarian in the New York Public Library system. Of course, the American Library Association gives an award in her honor. But outside of our kidlit circle, she is not necessarily broadly known, or especially, I think kids who do a biography unit or read books that have won Belpré Awards, they might be familiar with the idea of Pura Belpré or the name as a historical figure. But I don't know that kids have that many opportunities to consider what it would have been like to meet Belpré and who was she really in children's lives. And so one thing that's really fun about Adventure in the City of Stories is that my protagonists actually meet Pura Belpré. And perhaps more importantly, they meet a little girl who goes to Belpré's library. And they see all these kids who are Puerto Rican kids in New York City in the year 1930, going to the library and going to story time and hearing all of these folk tales and hearing the use of Spanish and the use of folk tales that would have been familiar to them in the library. And so my protagonists actually get to see the role that the public library has in the lives of these children. And I also think it's an interesting time of convergence. So in addition to going to Belpré's library, my trio also breaks into a Barnard College building because in the year 1930, the Chilean poet Gabriela Mistral was teaching at Barnard. And if you're familiar with a map of New York City, Pura Belpré's library and Barnard College are very, very close together. And so the kids kind of run from one place to the other. They take the subway, they take a streetcar, they kind of get to engage with all the old transportation technology. But they get to see one of the things I think is the most fun about the book is that they get to see the way Latinos in New York City in the year 1930 engaged with one another and knew one another. And so the climax of the book is when Gabriela Mistral goes to Pura Belpré's library for a reading. And I heavily fictionalize that scene because I don't know the details of what happened at that reading necessarily. And there are some magical plot elements that need to happen in that scene for the action adventure plot of the book. But that event really did happen. Gabriela Mistral really did read at Pura Belpré's library. And I think that one thing that sometimes happens when we're taught history in school is that we're sort of taught all of these historical figures as being separate. And we forget that they actually lived at the same time and in many cases actually knew one another. So in my book, there are several historical figures that come up and that are all connected in the book, but they were connected in real life. So Anne Carroll Moore hires Pura Belpré. Pura Belpré invites Gabriela Mistral to her library for a reading. Pura Belpré publishes Pérez and Martina, which is a retelling of a Puerto Rican or Caribbean. My mom's Cuban and used to tell me the story too. So a retelling of a Caribbean folktale in the United States. She publishes it as a book in the United States. Well, Arturo Schomburg is one of the people who encouraged Belpré to write that book and to get it published in the US. Arturo Schomburg himself was friends with José Martí, who was the late 19th century historical figure that was the subject of my first picture book. So all of these people are connected
Love
and
it.
converge in New York City. And I feel like there is this big intellectual lineage that stretches from the middle of the 19th century. People like José Martí who come to New York in this earlier wave of Latin immigration to the United States. And that line of kind of intellectual and creative connections brings us right up to where we are today in children's literature. So the book Adventure in the City of Stories, it takes place in 1930, but for me, it's really about all of the book people, for lack of a better word, who have carried me and who I think laid the path that I walk on as an author and as a New Yorker, as a bilingual person, as a Latina. These are the people that shaped me, and they were all connected. And so, yeah, for me, this book was a lot of, it begged the question to me of why do children's books matter? Why do I still care? At a time when we we are seeing a decline in book culture and whole book reading in many, many domains. Why do I care about children's literature? Why do I devote myself to writing children's books? And I'll also say, if you read the dedication, if you read the author's note in the book, that I wrote this book right after I had my third. And there was something about both Cousins in the Time of Magic books, Cousins in the Time of Magic and Adventure in the City of Stories. These are the books that I wrote when my children were newborns. And it was much harder to keep going with them than with anything else I've written because there was a pandemic, because I had newborn babies at the time I was writing them. And so I really had to answer that question of why children's books? Why does this matter? Why am I doing this with my time? And by writing about these historical figures and everything they did to establish dedicated libraries, reading rooms for children, dedicated library spaces for children, dedicated imprints publishing children's books, that that really that answered the question for me. It reminded me of why what I'm doing matters. Because I think it leads to a more meaningful, certainly to more knowledge, to more self-understanding, but I also think that it is a way in which we connect with children in a much more meaningful and effective way, is when we do so with stories and when we do so with fiction and when we read to our children. I think that's true of teachers. I think that's true of parents. I think that the book is a point of connection.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And as you were talking, I was thinking about something and I realized I was trying to remember where I'd read it. I was like, you wrote it. And it was, again, going back to that particular blog that's fresh in my mind. It's the idea of why books versus film or movies. And it's the idea that it's so intentional, the words that you choose, the way you paint that picture. And kids have a chance to bring their own experience to that. So even if you're dealing with those darker, tougher issues, a child's bringing what they know into that room.
Yeah.
And so if you've been intentional on how you paint it and they're coming in with minimal life understanding, they're not going to go away scarred and forever harmed by that. They'll go away with knowledge and maybe more empathy than they had before, maybe some more compassion, but it's different than having those visions and those images sort of assaulting you in different ways. And that's certainly another power of the written word and of what you're doing.
I think the concept of intentionality that you brought up is really important to me as a children's book creator, that I think a lot about every word. And then I work a lot with a lot of people, with authenticity readers, with my editor. My editor has an assistant editor. Then there are copy editors, there are proofreaders. There's such a strong community of people who work on books. And everybody working on books really actually primarily cares about what's best for children. And I think that that is one thing that the children's book world has going for it that makes me proud to be a part of it, in a way that I don't think is true of the types of media with which we are competing. I often think that many of the types of media kids are competing, or that our books are competing with, are they're designed to make the most money possible for someone and are frankly often irresponsible. I mean, we're certainly seeing that with with various forms of media that children consume outside of children's books, whether it's, whether it's meta product or various others. I won't go down the rabbit hole
No.
of the things we've all heard in the news, but we're really careful when we write children's books, and we
And
really
books
try.
matter.
Yeah,
They
and that doesn't
absolutely
mean we
matter.
always get it right,
No.
but the trying to me is the part that matters to me, is that we are giving kids the very best we can.
Right. And then that's, as you said, that's where the librarian and the teacher and the family members serve sort of that transactional space as well, the booksellers,
Yeah.
in terms of helping to match those books and helping kids find those books that spark that wonder and curiosity, that desire to go down rabbit holes and to learn more. That's an important role. And having those people makes a huge difference.
I think a lot about how much work it takes to make a kid a reader, because it takes so much, right? It's very easy to say, "Oh, we need more books about this," or "We need more this," because we need all of those things. We need
Right.
excellent books. We need them to be beautifully packaged and illustrated. We need them to be available in school libraries and public libraries. We need them to be in bookstores. We need them to be in classrooms. We need there to be booksellers and teachers and librarians who know about them to talk to kids and help them find that book that they want. And to say nothing of the work for parents of managing library holds, of schlepping their kids to the place where they can find the books that are going to be interest to them, to create browsing opportunities for their kids. I think that
Right.
it's
To
a lot.
know their kids, to be able to follow the blogs and go, "Oh, you loved Cousins in the Time of Magic. What else might you like that would
Yeah,
hit this?"
it's a huge amount of work, and but it's the only way our kids become readers. I don't think nobody's going to become a reader without access to a lot of books.
Agreed. So let's share your newest book.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What do you want me to tell you about it?
I want you to pick a chapter to read to us,
Okay. Okay.
because you've definitely whetted my appetite for it. And I'm so excited about the history. I'm excited about the librarians, and I can't wait to see how the kids are going to reappear in this one.
Okay. All right. Well, you're slightly putting me on the spot, but I think I am going to read you. Do you want me to read you an entire chapter, or maybe would a section be better?
I will give you permission to read whatever you think is going to whet our appetite.
Oh, goodness. Well, that's a lot of pressure, but here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read to you when there are a lot of lesser known libraries and public institutions in Adventure in the City of Stories that I hope everybody will get the book and read it. But I want to read you, I think, the section where they go to 42nd Street to the main branch of the New York Public Library, and
I love that
they
library
walk
so
up the
much.
steps between those lions, and they are in the room where it happens and where it happened from the beginning, because I think it's going to be a point of entry for a lot of people who are familiar with the library and are familiar with what happens once you walk past those lions, 42nd Street.
Imagine a space where curiosity drives innovation, where empathy fuels collaboration, and where learning feels less like a task and more like an adventure. My message isn't about adding more to your plate, it's about changing how you see the plate entirely. I'm Dr. Diane Jackson Schnorr, and through the power of purposeful play, I equip leaders, educators, and organizations with the tools you need to unlock creative problem solving, deepen human connection, and build resistant ecosystems of empathy and innovation. Attendees will walk away not just inspired, but empowered, with immediately usable strategies to spark curiosity in teams, to lead with empathy, and to infuse learning into their everyday cultures. You'll learn how play isn't child's work, it's the secret weapon of the world's most effective leaders and change makers. This is not a feel-good talk that fades by Monday morning, it's a movement. A shift in how we engage people, solve problems, and lead meaningful change. My talks and workshops are shaped by decades of experience in education and a transformative message that connects across sectors. Whether your audience is corporate, educational, or nonprofit, they'll leave ready to rethink what's possible, both personally and professionally. Because when we learn and lead through play, we don't just change organizations, we change the world. Check it out at drdianeadventures.com.
So this is chapter 5. It's called 42nd Street. Antonia led the way up the grand steps of the New York Public Library, 42nd Street. On either side of the steps was a statue lion, framing the building like elegant sentries. The inside of the library was as sophisticated as the outside. The floor looked like marble, and the high vaulted ceilings were like a church. The cousins followed Antonio back into the children's room. Camila gasped at the beautiful decorations. There were mahogany bookcases and hanging chandeliers. Throughout the room, there were tables adorned with flowers, and in the corner by the window, there was a large reading nook. The kids wandered wordlessly to the window nook. Camila ran her finger over the spines of the books. They were hardcovers, and she thought they would smell good, like dust and paper and glue on the inside. Strips of colored paper stuck out of the spines, as if each book had 5 or 6 bookmarks inside. "What are these for?" Camila whispered to Antonia. Antonia looked at the papers. "So you know what page you're on," she explained, as if it were obvious. "But why would someone put a bookmark in a book they already returned to the library?" Camila asked. Nearby at the circulation desk, a tall woman with softly curled hair and very thin lips was sorting a stack of books. She answered Camila's question. "Because times are difficult," the woman said. "The library can only afford 1 copy of each new book. So the children write their names on a slip of paper and mark their places. There simply aren't enough books to loan out, not with the price of paper right now, to say nothing of books." "That's terrible," Camila said indignantly. "Quite. Isn't it, Nicholas?" the woman said, though none of the kids could make out who Nicholas was. "Oh, but we have plenty of wonderful things for the children here, don't we, Nicholas?" Jorge interrupted. "Who is Nicholas?" Had this lady decided his name was Nicholas? George he had heard before, but Nicholas? The woman smiled brightly, her thin lips spreading into a curved line. "You haven't met Nicholas?" she asked kindly. "Why, say hello." She lifted a wooden doll off the counter and turned it toward them. The doll was about 8 inches tall and had painted wooden eyes and movable limbs. Jorge was revolted, but sensing that they would need this woman's help, leaned toward the doll. "Hello," he said brightly, pretending to shake the doll's hand. "Pleased to meet you, Nicholas. I'm so glad we were introduced by Miss—" He raised an eyebrow at the woman. "Miss Moore," she supplied quickly, with another smile for Siggy. Siggy paused, wondering what his next best move was. Instinctively, he turned back to the doll. It was clear that this doll was the key to Miss Moore's heart, and therefore to the entire children's room. He couldn't very well ask the doll the best hiding spot for a book you wanted kept safe for the next century, but what they needed was some time to explore the room on their own without Miss Moore breathing down their necks. "Little Nicholas," Siggy said, talking to the doll affectionately for Miss Moore's benefit, "do you have any books in Spanish?" Miss Moore examined the kids once more, her eyes lingering on Jorge and then on Antonia. "The library has books for all children and in their own languages. Why, Miss Belpré at the 115th Street Branch Library has been writing books for children like you." At this, the other kids lifted their heads eagerly. What was Miss Moore about to reveal? "You simply must go to one of her story hours," Miss Moore pressed. "We will," Camila cut in. Antonia chimed in. "We were just working in the neighborhood. We were cleaning windows." "I see," Miss Moore replied warmly. "In that case, I have a small collection in Spanish." She started to come around from behind the circulation desk, and Siggy groaned inwardly. But at that moment, a man in a gray suit walked into the library. "Miss Moore, you have a visitor." "Just a minute," Miss Moore said, "while I help the children." "It's a donor," the man in the gray suit said with a significant look. "Oh," Miss Moore frowned. "She's very angry about something," the man added. Siggy motioned for the others to move toward the bookcases at the back of the room, pretended he had spotted an interesting book. "I think you'd better come, Miss Moore. She doesn't look like a woman who likes to be kept waiting." "Well, all right then," Miss Moore said with a final glance at the children. She seemed satisfied that they had found books of interest and hurried off with the man in the suit, but not before he spotted the children. His eyes rested on them just a second too long, Siggy thought nervously. When Miss Moore and the man were gone, Antonia turned to the others. "We have to move fast. That man knows who we are, I swear." "He gave me the creeps," Camila whispered anxiously. "Maybe there's a secret panel behind one of these bookcases?" Siggy started pressing the sides of each bookcase. "What is this, a spy movie?" Jorge said sarcastically. "There isn't going to be a secret panel. It's got to be under one of these floor tile things." He kicked at them with the toe of his shoe. Under the floor is the only place we can guarantee it won't be touched for 100 years. Bookcases can be moved, but floors can't. He's right, Camila agreed. Then when we get back to our time, we'll just tell them to look under the floor and bingo, Tiasia's name was cleared. Okay, fine, Siggy snapped. How do we lift up these tiles? Antonia knelt down by the bookcase. Shouldn't be too hard. Look, some of them are already loose. If we can pry one up, do any of you have a pocket knife? Siggy added pocket knife to the list of things he was bringing the next time he traveled in the past, along with good snacks. Oh, never mind, Antonia said. Look, there's a little knife over there. The cousins watched Antonia run to the circulation desk. Why would anyone leave a knife on the circulation desk? Siggy asked blankly. Camila squinted. I think it's for that doll, Nicholas. Sure enough, Antonia plucked a knife, small but made of real metal, from a little dining set on a miniature table that had been laid out for the Nicholas doll. Wacky, Siggy shook his head. And lucky, Jorge added, grabbing the spoon from the dining set. Together, he and Antonia loosened one of the large tiles. They lifted it up together to reveal the perfect hiding spot. It was as if it had been made for this purpose, just deep and wide enough to hide a book where hopefully it would wait patiently for 100 years. Siggy pulled the book out of his backpack and was about to drop it inside when Camila stopped him. Wait, Siggy, she said. If we hide this book, then what happens in between now and when we clear Tiasia's name? I mean, what if we keep Pura Belpré from becoming famous? What if the New York Public Library never even puts the book in an exhibit? It suddenly struck Camila that they were playing with fire. What was it that Tiasia had said? About how if you sew a stitch in time, you pull 1,000 threads? Their plan seemed risky when Camila thought of it that way, maybe even foolish. Gami, Siggy explained, they printed a lot of copies of this book. I mean, obviously this is a special copy, but there must have been other important copies. This is just the one that gets exhibited. I don't know, but time somehow always works things out, doesn't it? I guess, Camila said doubtfully. Psst, a voice whispered. The kids jumped. Look over there, the voice whispered again. Cautiously, Siggy turned 360 degrees in place, surveying the empty children's room. There was no one there, but judging by the looks on the others' faces, he hadn't imagined the strange whisper. As if being pulled in by a magnetic beam, Siggy walked toward the circulation desk, where the Nicholas doll sat, alert at his little dining table. I'd like my knife and spoon back, too, the doll said. I was about to eat. Antonia covered her mouth and jabbed Jorge's shoulder. Did you? Yes, I heard that, Jorge said excitedly. Siggy was now standing squarely in front of the doll. He set the book on the circulation desk and bent down so he was on the doll's level. Did you say to look over there? Siggy asked. Yes, the Nicholas doll said. His painted smile didn't move, but the voice was definitely his, as if it were coming from inside his wooden body. There's a message for you. A message? Look, the doll insisted. Siggy followed the doll's command. To the left of the circulation desk was what looked like a large golden standpipe. It was a little shorter than Siggy and curved like the top of a candy cane. The curved part opened at the end, like the mouth of a water slide. Just as Siggy looked over, a small canister shot out the end. Jorge lunged forward. Got it, Jorge shouted, holding the canister in the air. Here, you open, he said, handing it to Siggy. Why me? You're the oldest, Jorge replied with a shrug. Siggy, still spooked, twisted the top off the canister. With trembling hands, he pulled out the slip of paper inside. My knife and spoon, the Nicholas doll prodded grouchily. So that is the scene where the kids are trying to get back a very special edition of Pura Belpré's book. They're trying to return it to the library because it's been stolen in the present, and they need to travel back in time to return it back to the library. And they meet Nicholas, who was this wooden doll that the librarian Anne Carroll Moore actually had. And she actually did have a little dining set for it, and she actually did pretend to talk to it and expect other people to talk to it too. And I thought that was so wacky that it had to make its way into the book. And I had a great time writing that scene where the kids meet the Nicholas doll and get a message through a pneumatic tube in the library. And it was just sort of fun and kind of strange and quirky and just fun digging up all of this old historical stuff about 1930 in the library.
Well, it sounds really fun. And I was going to ask, you're a historian by training. How does that sort of find its way into writing a fantasy adventure for kids?
Yeah, I mean, the fun thing about writing fantasy and fiction is that you get to make it all come to life, right? So all of these historical figures like Schomburg and Belpré and Mistral and Carol Moore, I've read so much about them and I got to imagine what would it be like to actually talk to them? If you met Arturo Schomburg, what kind of jokes would he make to you? So that was a delight. And it's also very stressful because the types of things that you read in history books and the types of things you need to know to make these characters come alive and make them do the sorts of interesting things that they do in a fantasy adventure are very different. And so a lot of times I was sort of filling in the blanks, sometimes sort of moving things around from where they were in history to make them square up a little bit more appropriately with the plot. And so there's a lot of truth and there's a lot of fiction in these books. And I do help readers tease out what is fiction and what is real history in the author's note and the back matter of the book. So in addition to an author's note that explains a lot of the history in the back of the book, and this is true of both Cousins books, there's also a special notes section that talks about every single historical figure that's mentioned in the book. It talks about sort of the historical periods and movements that are talked about in the book. There's a glossary where I explain what is an archive, various terms that come up in the book that maybe kids wouldn't otherwise know. And then there's further reading for kids. So if you are a kid and you want to read another novel set during the Great Depression, if you want to actually read a nonfiction book about the history of the Great Depression, there's a further reading section and then a bibliography for grown-ups. So there's a ton of information in the back of the book to help you understand what is real and what is fictional. But what I always tell kids is that assume that if there is magic, I made it up. And otherwise, I tried to be as true to history as I could be and as the record would allow.
That's a great way to look at it. And that would actually be, I'm thinking that would be a fun way to have kids engage with the book as they're reading too. Thinking about how teachers teach genre and how you are trying to teach kids to be able to parse out the fact and the fiction.
Yeah, and it was like, I thought this Nicholas doll thing, which was part of, Anne Carroll Moore was somebody who believed in sort of fancy and wonder in children's lives and in children's literature. And so the doll, my interpretation is that the doll was an extension of that. It was sort of trying to make the library a playful space, a place where you could kind of have that flight of fancy and believe that your dolls were talking. But it was also something that really weirded out a lot of adults who knew her and came to the library. And certainly when you read about it, you're like, "Wait, you've got to be kidding me." Like a grown woman with this doll that she's like always talking to, which is the way at least the way the historians who have written about her described it. But it was almost so perfect for fiction because it was like, well, I can make this doll say whatever I want. And nobody can say that the doll didn't say that, right? Like,
That's
there's no way to
awesome.
disprove what Nicholas, the 8-inch wooden doll, said or didn't say during his time, during his years. And so that was a lot of fun. And then that's echoed. They start at 42nd Street. They meet Anne Carroll Moore. They then go to Harlem, where they go to Pura Belpré's library and they meet the puppets that Belpré had because Belpré was famous for having these puppet shows for kids. And so there's the doll, there are the puppets, they're having these fantastical encounters with artifacts that are real, that were real historical artifacts that librarians use to help bring kids into the library and into storytelling. So I feel like the librarians kind of handed me this one by having these historical artifacts that were so well suited to kids imagining with them.
I love that. And I'm so excited for kids to be able to read this book. It's coming out soon. We'll drop the link so you can make your pre orders. Before we go, I was going to ask you the same question I always like to end with because I think it's an important one. And particularly when we think about the content of this book, what currently is bringing you hope?
What is currently bringing me hope? Mm. I want to say that what is currently bringing me hope is school, is having children in school And I say that not because my kid's school is perfect. And I say that not because I'm not someone who is, I am somebody who is very critical of a lot of what happens in schools. But uh, it seems like a glorious miracle to me that my kids they go to a large urban Title I public school and they love it. They have teachers who are incredible and who bring me hope and who bring me joy and who make every one of their days a good day. And I have an incredible parent community through sending my kids to school. And I think that radiates out to our whole neighborhood. We live in a neighborhood that has all sorts of families and all sorts of people at different stages of life. We have older people, we have younger people, we have, families, we have everything in between. And I feel like the school is such an important part of our community. It's a way that we connect to everybody, to our teachers, to our administrators, to our neighbors, to the people who are biking by. So I will say, as cynical as I am, I also continuously find hope in the fact that every day kids go to school and they meet amazing teachers who care for them and who love on them and who read to them and do fun activities with them and help them. It just feels like the most amazing gift in the world.
That is a wonderful source of hope. And I am going to be dropping links in the show notes so that you all can pre-order this book, check out Emma's other books, follow her on Substack, and definitely check out the webpage as well. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for sharing the magic of the world of libraries. I can't wait to read the second installment.
Yes. Thanks so much, Diane. I'm so happy that you had me here today.
You've been listening to the Adventures in Learning podcast with your host, Dr. Diane. If you like what you're hearing, please subscribe, download, and let us know what you think, and please tell a friend. If you want the full show notes and the pictures, please go to drdianeadventures.com. We look forward to you joining us on our next adventure.